Are you interested in buying a Z32? I happen to have that same bug. So here's a couple things that I recommend that you check out, at least when you're wanting to purchase one, so you know kind of what to look for, especially if you're not into these cars at all. There are 5 main points that we're going to make today. That will be maintenance, rust, body condition, interior, and your seals. I feel like these are kind of obvious or kind of pretty much just what you look for any vehicle. However, Z's are kind of weird. These cars are a collector sports car now, so we want to try to do the best to take care of them. However, not everyone has the same intention as me. Sometimes cars get wrecked, they get repaired, and not everyone has the same work ethic or just love for the chassis in general. So they may cut corners and just give you an all-around less condition of a car. Over my past 10 years of buying these cars, this is what I found. So the first thing, obviously, is maintenance. Maintenance correlates to how well the car has been taken care of or if it's been cared for, and also lets you know kind of how much time you have before you have to worry about doing the preferred maintenance again. Since these are timing belts, you want to change them every 60 to 120,000, and there's corresponding parts that you change at 60 and 120, such as the water pump, VTC springs, just hoses, and usually your pulley belts as well is something you want to look into. But at 120K, it becomes a little more involved. You need cam seals, crank seal, and you got to take a couple more things off the motor to really get it sorted. And that's when it comes in to most people don't work on these themselves. A lot of shops won't work on these because these are kind of complex, over-engineered 90s sports cars. So typically you would try to stick with a Z specialist. This right here is a timing card or sticker. A lot of times these are placed in the engine bay, and they will be on your timing covers about right here. See, it's perfect size. A lot of times people will put them on the radiator support. This will let you know when this big service has been completed. However, not everyone documents their cars and saves documentation and receipts and stuff. I'm guilty to one. I do remember what I've done to my cars, but I don't always document and save receipts. A lot of times sellers or people who really care for their Z's and bought this thing for a pretty penny one day previously, they typically keep all receipts and will usually have a receipt book. If they don't have that, don't fret. Most of them don't. So far, I've only had 2 vehicles in my lifetime that's ever came to my possession like that. Making sure fluids are changed, injectors are serviced. A big thing is the fuel injectors. You want to make sure they have phase 2 fuel injectors. Phase 1 fuel injectors are square plug like this, while phase 2 injectors will be round like this. Pretty much when these cars were designed, and in Japan, E85 was not in our fuel. Old fuel injectors were not designed and thought of E85. So what happens is when you run E85 on those old style fuel injectors, it melts the coating around the coil and will kill the injector, allowing it to just stay open or completely closed all the time, either hydro-locking or just not working at all. Big thing, since we all pretty much have 10% ethanol in our fuel nowadays, you need to have those phase 2 to save yourself from headaches. Some people are lucky and theirs are still working, but most of us, they've already went long time ago. One thing you can do typically is check the wiring harness and check its general condition. The plugs, these older style plugs, up here you want to check for that green corrosion that you see from the sensor itself getting wet, and you really want to check your PTU. If this is in rough shape, this is what caused the car to spark, and well, let's just say it won't spark. Phase 1 PTUs were recalled by Nissan. They had bad plug design. Somehow, when Nissan recalled it, they didn't really fix the problem. I mean, they fixed the PTU, but they sold you a sub-harness to put in its place that still had the bad connections on it. So you still have the ability to corrode your wiring and leave your PTU useless. They fixed it, I think, in 93, 94. All phase 2 stuff just has normal crimp connections. There's no sub-harness. Honestly, without documentation of anything, you're just listening to the word of the seller and trusting the word of the seller, and sometimes it's not the best. However, if it's someone that's pretty seasoned in these vehicles, you can probably bet you're pretty safe. Now let's move on to the next thing you should look out for. Big problem with these cars, kind of what I was insinuating with the people repairing these and not being too careful about it. These are unibody cars, so they're literally consisted of hundreds of panels just spot welded together to make the car. Once you get a little bit of rust started, if you're up in the rust belt like some of us, it's really hard to stop it if you let it go too long. Little stuff like this, just surface rust, no big deal. About all of these will probably have surface rust right here. And that's exactly why we have went and have started restoring this Z. We don't want rust. Rust is bad. A couple common places that you can find rust are probably obviously the frame rails. These cars don't really have frames. These are the rails. These rails are just spot welded onto the car to give it some rigidity. It serves as no point of a frame. Not only do a bunch of people get crazy on lifting them off of that frame, it happens to take the brunt of the damage down there in the salt and actually gets pretty rusty very easily. On this Z, straight boxed in rail, exactly how it should be. Now that rust is a little more visual and you can see about how crusted and just completely compromised that is. There are actually a lot of spots on the car that you want to check just for lack of care from previous owners. This one seems to be a big one. It'll rot behind the fender if you're missing a fender liner, and it'll cake up with all the dirt and hold ice and salt and stuff and rot this out. Now this right here is probably one of the most common on these things. Just once the salt gets in through the panels and starts, you really cannot stop that rust. It's just bad. Not only right here, you'll look at your wheel well, inner well, the arch, as well as you want to check right back here where everything collects from the rear tire. This one appears, yeah, that one's rusted. It's completely separated. It just looks like a pile of crud, but it's literally separated. Also, just generally check underneath the car for any kind of rust that you could see. It doesn't really have specific places it always starts. It's kind of, if anyone's been under here, nick the undercoating off and then just let it all start. That's as easy as it takes for weird located rust to start. Another really common place for the Z to rust out is right here underneath the battery tray. As you can see, all these leaves and stuff accumulate here, and a lot of time this passenger cowl, when you pull the battery out, this cowl will be broken if you don't get the right angle. You should just move the cowl. You don't always have to, but it's just what happens sometimes when people own these, and that over time that allows all of the debris, weather, everything to sit in there, get wet, and then rot that panel out, which then leaves you a hole right here. Doesn't help with the tire constantly kicking up stuff there if you don't have a fender liner. If you do ever see rust up here along this or along the sides, you should check your windshield, see if it is original. It should say Nissan on the driver corner. If it's not, it's been replaced and someone did not clean the metal good enough, prepped it before they put it on, and then it started to rust. My Z is like this. I'm so sad about it to this day, but we get to fix that this year. Now let's move on to step 3. I shouldn't say step 3, I should say the third thing to look at, and that is just the overall condition of the body, panels, and kind of to look for damage and how to look for damage. Perfect example right here. When I bought my slick top, I never knew that it had damage except on the rear. Rear bumper was a little messed up, and honestly I got this thing late at night, drove it 6 hours back. Can't complain, but this thing was pretty messed up. I'm not sure how well you can tell in the video. I know I can see it. You can see right here, this is slightly raised up. This side is pretty flat. That is because there has been an incident up here in this corner, and it has pushed the radiator support and headlight bucket back and slightly tweaked it. And what really solidifies this claim is when you pull the nose panel off, you can see the little bit of crunch here. So this thing has been in a front end collision and needs a little bit of realigning to do. Another easy thing to kind of check for is all your gaps between panels, if that looks right, inconsistent, and also checking your bolts to see if they've been removed, possibly different color underneath, and you can usually tell the alignment because of where they put them from the factory versus sometimes when people put them back on. Now the radiator support is also a frequent flyer. You can see right there it's bowed up, and that's because some nincompoop lifted this thing up by the radiator support. Don't do that, just use the subframe. It's literally like another 9 inches, a foot back. It's not that big of a deal. And what happens when you lift it there is it bows and tightens everything up here in the front, and often you will bring off your alignment from your hood to your fenders, headlights, and nose panel. You ever see a wonky front end? It's likely either in a front end collision or it has that radiator support lifted from. Now this is probably one of the biggest things that I look for when I buy a Z, at least to tell kind of what I'm going to do with it or what my plans are. Not too many Zs, kind of like the radiator support, are all lifted evenly. A lot of people like to take just the stock jack. They think because it has that slit, they can just put it anywhere on the car and lift it by the pinch welds. You cannot do that. That only works in the reinforced rear where there's like 4 panels welded together and it's reinforced for the car. The rest of the car is not like that. It's just like thin 14, 16 gauge steel or something. You will want to check the condition of your pinch welds. This one, you can see a little bit of variation there and here. Those were all folded over. One day I took vice grips and I bent them back. They're not perfect by any means. However, it'll work for now. Let me show you a couple more examples of what these are like when they're bad and when they're perfect. This is probably more so the typical Z, totally flattened out. The fender bolts right here and right here, so people will ruin that for us, or we can't remove the fender correctly. Not only that, they fold them over completely and they begin to rust. This is my biggest go-to, honestly sometimes a deal breaker, because if those are usually tore up, it just shows the lack of care that they took for the rest of the car. Like I mentioned about the collisions, not only can you look in that sort of manner to tell if it's been replaced, if you see back here in this panel, you can see those weird like growths almost. That's where someone has re-welded spot welds with a welder instead of a spot weld machine. That tells me that this car has been disassembled and repaired and reassembled, and it's not factory anymore. A couple other ways you can tell is missing seam sealer. Generally there's seam sealer in about every seam on these Zs. If you're missing seam sealer, you've probably had some kind of work done. So you can see all this, that's seam sealer. The stuff that just looks like, who the heck did this? Did they care? Did they just slop it on? That's seam sealer. That's to keep moisture from between the seams of your panels to keep the cars from rusting. A lot of times people will skip steps putting this back together. They won't put seam sealer back. Then you have a bigger problem on your hands sooner than later because your seams are starting to rust, and that's not good. Overall, little things can also just help you, like if you see cracks in your bumper paint, kind of like that, that entails there's been a rear end collision. Not only that, missing paint right there, but this, you can see the frame rails are actually kinked. And that tells that this car has been in a rear end collision and it has not been repaired. Now this kind of goes hand in hand with title status. If you have a rebuilt title, your car's been wrecked and they fixed it. This was a rebuilt title. I had no idea what any of that was 10 years ago, so we just went with it. Now we're paying the price. Another way you can just check for general body work and stuff, take a magnet with you, see how tough it sticks along the car, preferably with some cloth on the end so you don't scratch the car, and you can check for Bondo, thickness of paint, and if it's been repaired and just caked in with a bunch of putty. That sums up everything you should look for body wise. Now let's move on to the next one, interior. Interior is pretty straightforward. The main thing here on door panels is up here. These will like to crack the same way they do down here, especially if you pull any of this stuff in and out a bunch, or it's just sitting in the sun, it'll dry and it'll crack out. Seats, you always want to check. This bolster here is worn down 99% of the time, just like this one, because actually that's a driver's seat and this is a passenger. Someone just flip-flopped it. On our AC pods or control pods, you can see there's actually electrical tape sealing these things down. It's because there's plastic screw bosses in here that tend to break when you put a screw in it, because over time that plastic shrinks and kind of dries up sitting up here in the sun because it's getting the brunt of the sun. So when you go to remove that, 9 times out of 10 they break. Luckily, zspec has made a reproduction and is very affordable compared to the upwards of $300 OEM. Don't fret too much if your oil pressure gauge doesn't work. That's pretty typical of a Z. For me, the biggest concern is usually the seats, the condition, cigarette holes. If the car's been smoked in, that's a big thing. It doesn't take much to tell if a car's been smoked in. Also, flip your ashtray in your cars. It'll tell you a big story about your car, I promise. Another kind of fatal flaw for these things is up here. We don't have the cracked 240SX curse. We actually just have dash peel. Those dash vents lift up, and the fix for this is to pull your dash and glue it with some C-clamps and a piece of wood across, or some people will actually use a syringe, drop some glue in from up here, and stuff tennis balls up here and wedge them between the glass and the dashboard to repair it. Now that these cars are becoming 30 years old, check your mirror, see if it's delaminating at all. This one's really not that bad, but some of them are bad. I always kind of check this kind of stuff too. You see this isn't really in line and it doesn't line up properly. This is kind of peeled off. This tells me the interior has been apart before and has potentially been repaired for some sort of reason. This is also a pretty bad flaw about Z's. If anyone's ever removed the A-pillars, these clips break off, they get stuck, and they separate from the panel itself. And like this previous owner, I found a way to jimmy rig it for the time being. By looking at your headliner, generally you can tell kind of if your T-tops have leaked or anything, or just usually the interior in general. If it's very like dirty and almost moldy looking, you've got probably a leak somewhere and you've got moisture inside the car. Dry it out, find the leak ASAP. Don't let it continue because it will totally ruin your car. Every electronic component in here will become corroded and you will just have mad problems. Your clock may not work, that's no big deal. People repair them, they can get you squared away. As far as the rear, you really just want to check the condition of your panels if they're cracked, because a lot of times, since these are T-top cars, people put the T-tops back there, they don't strap them in with the factory strap, then you get all Z happy, whip it on the road, swing your T-tops around in the back and crack and break all of your trunk panels. Probably 80% of them that I get, and every out of all panels are broken. There may be one panel that survives per car. Some people are just very impatient, I think. You will have a raised formed panel that will have like a ridge on the outside to make it a parcel tray, or well, it is a parcel tray, but it just keeps things from falling out of it and rolling around. Check those edges, see if they're hard and uniform. If not, it's probably gotten wet and someone has laid something too heavy on it and broke it down and just turned it to like a cloth. It's supposed to be cardboard backed or based. I also didn't mention head units. I mean, audio, that's a whole thing in itself. I've found so many crap shows. Just check speakers work. If it's got the factory Bose system like this, it probably doesn't work. Don't fret, you'll just replace your speakers in your head unit with something cooler. For the last one, number 5, we have our seals. The reason why you want to kind of check some of your seals, well, they're becoming hard to find. Not many suppliers have them, and if you pay for new OEM, you're going to be buying a whole new car just in seals. Blaster Z currently reproduces seals and is the only seal guy for the Z that I know of, so if you're looking for some, check them out. If I remember, I'll put the tag in the description. Since these are T-top cars, that's really just the biggest concern that you want to check. One way to tell without even just checking your seal life or condition, check your seat. You can see this right here has had a leaky seal because it's dripping water about right here, cleaning all that dirt and just soaking it outwards to that part of the seat. Makes it look terrible. Honestly, most of these are like that. Another way you can kind of tell if it's been leaking here is kind of check the condition of your panel. Is your rubber real brittle? There will be a bunch of water spots about right here because a lot of times it'll just drip right here and it can roll down the inside of your window and soak your panel up. Generally you just ask or check the seats if the T-tops leak, but I mean it really doesn't hurt to examine them. Like these ones don't look terrible. However, usually it's right here in this little corner that gets it clogged up. If you guys do just send it and have a leaky T-top car, click the link up here and I'll show you guys how you can repair that in 3 different ways on a Z32. Door seals are kind of like an annoying thing that you want to check. You can see this one's missing this bit. The same door seal that runs here is the same door seal that runs along this whole end of the car here, all the way up and right here. So that's all one unit. If yours is cracking at any position or place, you can buy a new one from Blaster Z. Doors are specific 2+0 to 2+2, so don't get that confused when you are ordering new ones. Never hurts to check your headlight gasket. You can see this one right here is busted. And honestly, just a funky looking gasket anyway will just change the look of your car. I also totally forgot to mention, if you can see right here, this headlight is broken. If your headlight's a little like off track and it's not straight, a lot of times that is because the headlight mount is broken. Someone sat on it, hit it, ran into something, vice versa. So this one, all good, sturdy, solid. This one, floppy and no good. Goes along with the seals. If your seal don't fit right, coming to something like this, and well, and trust me, it's not enjoyable to look at that every time you come out and see your Z. For the final seal that I believe really means anything is this seal for your hatch. If this seal is compromised, all of your exhaust fumes will come up through the seal and out your window when you're driving down the road, and it will just reek of exhaust fumes. These, I believe you can get these from Blaster Z reasonably, probably $100 at most. If not, it's still pretty affordable. I feel like this may be factory. It may be like a breathe hole or something. I don't know. If I had to guess, it's so when this is compressed that it allows air out of it. However, sometimes you see these things and they'll have like 6 holes in them, or they'll have a hole every 3 inches all the way around. I don't know if this is something someone's did to try to fix it. Sometimes they just have big holes in them, like someone took a bite out of it. So that actually pretty much concludes everything to look for when buying a Z32. Now here's something I didn't have planned. Here's a couple honorable mentions that I feel like I probably should have mentioned, but I realized after the fact. Back here, this is on 4-seater. You can check under this panel. Look around generally, see if it's wet. This is your ABS unit. You don't want to have fluid leaking. If you have fluid leaking back there, you will literally destroy all the paint from the trunk of your car, and you will actually have brake fluid soak in between the seams of your panels and begin to rust. It won't rust as long as there's brake fluid, but as soon as that brake fluid's replaced with any kind of moisture, it's game over. And on 2-seaters, the ABS is located right here, which is behind this little panel right behind the passenger seat. You can pull that off and usually just look straight in. It may have a blanket on it you can just pull off, check the condition of everything around it. Probably a rather obvious one. Check the date of your battery, you kind of see how old it is, check the brand of it, make sure you got a decent one. Doesn't hurt. Check your fluid. If it's clean and clear, that means you haven't had moisture exposed to the system. And if it is all black and dirty like that, you're going to be looking for a fluid flush. Brake fluid pulls moisture from the air, so the longer you have that even exposed and open while filling it and stuff, you're introducing moisture back into the system. So it's better to do that quickly and not when it's raining. These fans are known to kind of crack over time. This one's actually pretty good. You can see that little crack right there. Maybe, yeah, you can see it a little bit. But that will actually just keep growing over time, and eventually it'll detonate and just blow everything up. It's the last thing you want to happen. Check that out. Make sure it's just not all cracked out. I've had some cracked all the way through. It's not that urgent, but if there is a huge gap in between that and it feels like it's about to let loose, don't risk it. Change that, or intend to change it when you get the car. These cars, they're 30 years old. They've got a lot of problems now. Wiring harnesses are like my #1 thing I recommend to upgrade when you get these, other than like the fuel injectors and just quality of life things. I'm actually not going to mention anything suspension wise on these. That I feel like that's probably a given, that it's probably wrecked unless it's been reported that it's been fixed. These bushings and rubber is 30 years old. Any 30-year-old rubber is bound to need replaced. That's a big job in itself, and honestly, you guys, don't cheap out on these cars. I got mad lucky getting my slick top for $1,200 10 years ago. Nowadays, $1,200 is going to get you something a bit like this that has been absolutely rusted, can be flintstoned, and it's just trash. The market's changing, guys. These cars aren't getting any more common. They're already super uncommon as it is. I'm not saying to screw yourself, but typically the more you pay for a Z, the better it's going to be, and the better it's going to treat you, because the price generally reflects kind of its condition. There's always people out there asking crazy amounts for polished turds. You just got to be wary of them and bad sellers in general. Little bits of rust like this on your suspension components isn't really a big deal. It's not a deal breaker. It just means it's going to look that much better when you finally start to go project car mode, clean it up, and go from there and upgrade. At this point in time, there's nothing that's really coming to my mind that's special, and I really just don't want to leave you guys out of anything. So if I have any other things that pop up, we'll be sure to leave them in the description below, so don't forget to check the description. Sorry, automatic guys, I don't know much for you. I'm more of a 5-speed. If you can test drive it, make sure kind of shift it a little bit quicker, not super fast. Z-trans are kind of notchy. It's the best way I can explain it. You don't just shift them fast and hard. Take your time, but you don't gotta take too much time. Synchros on these things, they're just kind of weird. That's just a given. I've at least found that out on every Z that I've driven. I really hope this video can help a couple of you guys decide and maybe determine what you want to do buying a Z, or maybe if you're going to buy that Z, or just leave it for all of us old 90s Nissans junk heads. And if you guys enjoyed the video, please don't forget to drop a like and subscribe down below, and stay tuned for more videos and to see what we have in store in the future. Like our twin turbo convertible restoration, or our 600 horsepower 4-seater up here, or our 2B RB26 slick top, and my RB25 S13. Tons more to come, so if you want to see, stay tuned. We'll catch you then. Peace.